What if the hall you've heard of your entire life was never invented at all? What if Valhalla, that golden hall of the chosen dead, was not a story someone dreamed into being, but the last echo of something so old it had already been old for 1,000 years before the first Viking poet ever set it into words? Close your eyes for a moment, or let them rest where they are. You don't need to concentrate. You don't need to hold on to anything. Just let the questions settle around you like dust in a quiet room. Because tonight, we're not going to talk about Valhalla the way you've heard it talked about before. We're not going to walk through the familiar mythology as though it appeared fully formed from the imagination of some anonymous Norse bard. Instead, we're going to go back further, much further. We're going to descend into the archaeological shadows where the real origins of this idea are buried, layer by layer, beneath the soil of Bronze Age Scandinavia, beneath the linguistic sediment of Proto-Germanic languages that were already ancient when Rome was young, beneath the accumulated weight of burial practices and weapon rituals and burning halls that stretch back more than 3,000 years before a single word of the Poetic Edda was ever committed to vellum. The truth about Valhalla is not the truth you were told, and that truth, the real one, the older one, is far more remarkable than the myth. Before we go any further into the archive tonight, if you find yourself drawn to these kinds of explorations, the ones where history refuses to behave neatly, where the official story turns out to be a late chapter in a much longer book, consider subscribing to the channel. And if you're listening in the dark somewhere, whether it's late evening or deep into the quiet hours of the night, drop a comment telling me where you are and what time it is. There's something I find genuinely moving about imagining this silence stretching across the world, all of us in our separate darknesses drawn to the same ancient questions. Now let us settle in. Picture the landscape of southeastern Sweden in approximately 1400 BC. The Bronze Age is in full expression across Scandinavia. The great forests are dense and largely unbroken. The coastlines are ragged and cold. The people who live here are not the Vikings you might imagine, not the longship sailors of a later millennium, but their ancestors, separated from the world of Odin and Thor by as much time as separates us from the fall of Rome. These are people who have access to bronze, who trade across enormous distances, who organize themselves around warrior elites, whose status is marked in death as clearly as it was in life. And in southeastern Sweden, in a place called Kivik, someone very important has died. The grave they built for this person is extraordinary by any measure. It is a massive stone cist, a chamber constructed from large slabs of stone, and it contains the kind of objects that tell you immediately what this person was in life. Bronze razors, swords, ceremonial axes. These objects are arranged around the body with deliberate care, as though someone understood that the dead would need them where they were going. But it is the interior walls of the grave that stop you when you look at them carefully. The stone slabs are carved, and what they show is not random decoration. There are warriors, there are chariots, there are processions, and at the end of those processions, rendered in the simple but unmistakable lines of Bronze Age carving, is a large building, a hall. This detail is profoundly significant. We are standing in this moment more than 3,000 years before the Poetic Edda was compiled. We are looking at a time when the Germanic peoples had not yet separated into the distinct tribal groups that would eventually produce Danes, Swedes, Norwegians, Goths, Saxons, Franks. The Norse mythology we associate with Valhalla does not yet exist in any form we would recognize, and yet here, carved into the stone walls of a burial chamber, is the image of a procession of warriors moving toward a great hall after death. The idea was already there, already ancient enough to be carved in stone, already central enough to be placed inside the most important burial monument in the landscape. Let that settle for a moment. Let the weight of it rest in your mind without any urgency to resolve it. Consider what it means that someone, standing in the sun of a Bronze Age afternoon, chose to spend enormous time and effort carving this image into stone. Stone carving is not casual work. It requires tools, skill, patience, and intention. The person who made these carvings was not decorating idly. They were making a statement of belief so important that it needed to be rendered in the most permanent medium available to them. They were saying, in the language of image rather than word, that the dead warrior does not simply end. The dead warrior travels, and at the end of the journey there is a hall. The Kivik grave sits within a larger landscape of Bronze Age monumentality that tells us this belief was not isolated to a single community or a single moment. The surrounding region contains dozens of burial mounds, some of them enormous, raised over the remains of individuals who were clearly understood as occupying a special category of the dead. Not all dead people received this treatment. Not all dead people were buried with weapons and razors and ceremonial axes. Not all dead people had stone chambers carved with images of processions moving toward great halls. The people who received this treatment were warriors, and the treatment they received tells us something precise about what their communities believed was happening to them after death. They were going somewhere specific. They were going to a hall. The Kivik grave is not alone. When archaeologists examine the broader pattern of Bronze Age burial practices across Denmark, southern Sweden, and Norway, they find the same themes recurring with a consistency that cannot be accidental. At the Sagaholm Barrow complex in Västra Gotland, bronze weapons are found deliberately broken before being placed with the dead. The swords are bent, the spear points are snapped, the shields are crushed. This is not vandalism, this is ritual. Someone has deliberately destroyed these objects before placing them in the grave. And the most compelling interpretation is that this destruction was a form of transformation, a way of moving the weapon from the earthly realm into whatever realm the warrior was traveling to. You don't bury a functional sword with a dead man because the sword is still useful here. You bury a ritually killed sword because you believe it is now useful somewhere else. This pattern of deliberate weapon destruction will follow us through 3,000 years of Scandinavian history. It will appear in the great bog deposits of the Iron Age. It will appear in the ship burials of the Viking Age, and it will echo, unmistakably, in the literary descriptions of Valhalla itself, where the Einherjar, the chosen warrior dead, receive new weapons each day for their eternal battles. The weapons they use are not earthly weapons, they are weapons of another order entirely. But let us not move too quickly. The archive rewards patience. Consider what it means that these burial practices are so consistent across such a vast span of time and geography. We're not talking about a single culture in a single location. We're talking about a pattern that appears across the entire Scandinavian peninsula and into the Danish archipelago, maintained across centuries, across the transitions between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, across the enormous social and technological changes that transform these societies again and again. Something in the core of this belief system was stable enough to survive all of that change. Something about the idea of the warrior dead travelling to a great hall was so fundamental, so deeply rooted in how these people understood the world, that it persisted across 3 millennia. What does it take for an idea to survive 3,000 years? What kind of truth does an idea have to carry to outlast empires, migrations, climate changes, and the complete transformation of material culture? We tend to think of mythology as something fragile, as stories that drift and change and eventually dissolve into the general amnesia of history. But some ideas are not fragile at all. Some ideas are load-bearing structures in the architecture of a culture, and when you try to remove them, the whole edifice shakes. The warrior hall was one of those ideas. Think about the other ideas that have survived comparable spans of time. The belief in a sky god who governs thunder and lightning. The idea that the dead require provisions for a journey. The concept of a sacred mountain at the center of the world. These are ideas that appear in cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, and their persistence tells us something important about the depth at which they are embedded in human ways of understanding existence. They are not surface features of culture, they are structural ones. They are the foundations on which everything else is built. The warrior hall belongs in this category, and its persistence in the archaeological record of Scandinavia across the full span from the Bronze Age to the Viking Age tells us that it was not a late invention, not a creative flourish of Viking Age mythology, but something far older, far more deeply embedded, far more fundamental to how the people of this region understood the relationship between life, death, and the forces that governed both. Now, let us look at the physical halls themselves, because this is where the archaeological record becomes almost startlingly direct in its implications. At a site called Uppakra in southern Sweden, excavations have revealed something extraordinary. Here, continuously rebuilt and expanded from the 1st century BC through the 10th century AD, stood a great hall that measured more than 50 meters in length. 50 meters. This is not a house. This is not a longhouse in the ordinary sense. This is a structure designed to accommodate hundreds of people, with massive timber posts supporting a roof that would have been visible from a considerable distance across the landscape. And the floor of this hall tells a story that the walls cannot. Beneath the successive layers of occupation, archaeologists found deposits of weapons, jewelry, and animal bones from repeated feasting. Not from a single feast, not from one generation of use, but from layer upon layer of accumulated ritual activity spanning nearly 1,000 years. The hall was not merely a building, it was a living institution, a place where the same ceremonies were performed generation after generation, where the same beliefs were enacted in the same architectural space across a span of time that dwarfs anything we in the modern world would recognize as institutional continuity. Think about what 1,000 years of continuous ritual use means. The hall at Uppakra was already ancient when the first Viking longships began their raids on the monasteries of England and Ireland. The warriors who feasted in its earliest phases were as distant from the warriors of the Viking Age as the warriors of the Viking Age are from us. And yet the hall stood. And yet the feasting continued. And yet the weapons were deposited in the same patterns, the same rhythms, the same ceremonial logic. This wasn't merely a building. It was a cosmological statement. The hall was the center of the ordered world, the place where warriors gathered, where feasting bound the living together, where the social hierarchy was enacted and reinforced and celebrated. And because the hall was the center of the living world, it became, naturally, inevitably, the center of the world the dead were imagined to inhabit. Imagine walking toward the hall at Uppakra on a winter evening in the 3rd century AD. The sky above the Swedish plain is already dark, and the cold is the kind of cold that makes the air itself feel like a presence, something you move through rather than simply breathe. But ahead of you, through the trees, there is light. There is the sound of voices and the smell of roasting meat and the faint, rhythmic sound of something being struck in time, a drum or a hand against a wooden surface. The hall is lit from within. The hall is alive, and as you approach it, you understand, in the way that the body understands things before the mind has words for them, that this place is the center of everything, that outside this place is darkness and cold and the formless chaos of the world without order, and inside this place is warmth and light and the fellowship of those who have agreed to stand together against whatever the darkness contains. If you believed that this hall was the center of the living world, what would you believe about the world of the dead? You would believe, almost inevitably, that the dead inhabit a hall of the same kind, a hall that is warmer and more permanent and more abundantly supplied than any earthly hall could be. A hall where the fellowship is unbreakable because the warriors who inhabit it have already passed through the only thing that could break it. The Great Hall at Gudme on the island of Funen provides another dimension of this picture. Gudme, which means something close to home of the gods in Old Norse, contains remains of multiple great halls built and rebuilt over several centuries. Each phase of construction is associated with massive deposits of gold objects, weapons, and imported luxury goods from across the known world. Roman glass, Byzantine metalwork, objects that travelled enormous distances to end up deposited in this place. The hall's construction, incorporated specific architectural features, raised floors, carved posts, and central hearths that match with remarkable precision the descriptions of divine halls that appear in later mythological sources. Gudme appears to have functioned as a religious centre of the First Order, a place where the earthly hall was understood to be a mirror, or perhaps a model, of a divine counterpart somewhere beyond the visible world. The concentration of wealth and ritual activity here suggests that people travelled to this place from considerable distances, bringing offerings, participating in ceremonies, enacting beliefs about the relationship between the human world and the world of the gods. The Roman glass at Gudme is particularly worth pausing on. Roman glass in 4th century Funen represents an object that has travelled perhaps 2,000 kilometres from its place of manufacture, passing through multiple hands, crossing multiple cultural boundaries, to arrive at this hall in this place. Someone valued it enough to carry it that far, and then someone valued the hall enough to deposit it there rather than keep it. The glass was not lost. It was given. It was transferred from the human world of ownership and use to the divine world of the hall, and whatever powers the hall represented. This is the logic of offering, of sacrifice, of the deliberate transfer of valued things from the human world to the divine one. And it is the same logic that animates the weapon deposits in the bogs, the burning of halls, the placement of grave goods in burial chambers. The human world and the divine world are in relationship. The relationship requires maintenance, and the maintenance takes the form of deliberate, costly, irreversible gifts from one side to the other. And what were those beliefs? What was the theology, if we can call it that animated these practices? The linguistic archaeology offers us a way in. The word Valhalla is a compound. It consists of two elements that, when you examine them carefully, reveal the entire conceptual architecture of the belief system they encode. The first element comes from Proto-Germanic, a reconstructed ancestor language spoken before the various Germanic tribes separated into distinct groups. This element, Wallers in its reconstructed form, referred to those slain in battle, to the battlefield dead as a specific and distinct category of the dead. Not all dead people, not the elderly who died in their beds, not the children who died of illness, not the women who died in childbirth. Specifically, those who died in combat, those who died with weapons in their hands. This linguistic specificity tells us something important. The Proto-Germanic speakers had a word for this category of the dead that was distinct from their general word for the dead. They had conceptually separated the warrior dead from all other dead people, had given this category its own linguistic marker, its own conceptual space. And this word connects to a broader Indo-European root, meaning to strike down or wound, a root that appears in Celtic languages as well, and in Latin as vulnus, meaning wound. The concept of warrior dead as a distinct category existed across multiple Indo-European cultures before Germanic speakers ever separated into distinct tribal groups. This is not a Norse idea. This is not even a Germanic idea in the narrow sense. This is an Indo-European idea. something that existed in the common ancestor culture of peoples who would eventually spread across a vast portion of Eurasia, and whose descendants would include not only the Norse and the Germanic tribes, but also the Celts, the Romans, the Greeks, the Persians, the Indians. The second element of Valhalla, the hall element, derives from a Proto-Indo-European root meaning to cover or conceal. This same root produces Latin cella and Greek calyptine, to conceal, which gives us calypso and apocalypse. The hall, in its deepest etymological meaning, is a covered space, a protected enclosure, a place that shields those within it from the hostile world outside. In Germanic social organization, this meaning was not merely architectural, it was cosmological. The hall represented the ordered cosmos set against the chaos of the wilderness. Inside the hall, there was warmth, light, fellowship, feasting, the social bonds that made human life possible. Outside the hall, there was cold, darkness, wolves, the unpredictable forces that could destroy everything. The hall was civilization made physical, made architectural, made into a space you could enter and feel the difference between order and chaos. When you combine these two elements, you get something that is not just a name, but a complete theological statement. Valhalla is the hall of the warrior dead. It is the place where those who died defending the ordered world, those who died fighting the chaos outside the hall, are gathered into the ultimate hall. The hall that is itself the cosmic center of the ordered universe. The hall where the social bonds of warrior fellowship are made permanent and eternal. This wasn't invented by a Viking Age poet. This was assembled from the oldest available conceptual materials in the Indo-European toolkit. The linguistic trail goes even deeper when you follow the word for the Valkyries themselves, the choosers of the slain. Their title encodes the same Proto-Germanic root as the first element of Valhalla. They are not a later addition to the mythology, not a poetic embellishment invented by some creative Norse bard. They are built into the name of the place they serve, which means they were part of the conceptual architecture of this belief system from the very beginning. From the moment when the ancestor language first developed the vocabulary to describe the warrior dead as a distinct category. The Valkyries are as old as the word Valhalla, and the word Valhalla is older than any culture we would recognize as Norse. If this kind of deep history moves something in you, I'd love to know what other ancient mysteries keep you awake at night. Leave it in the comments. The archive reads every one. Now let us follow the comparative thread further, because the picture becomes even more remarkable when you look beyond Scandinavia. The Celtic traditions of Ireland and Wales preserve beliefs about the other world that are strikingly parallel to what we find in Norse mythology. The Irish describe the Cid Mounds, the underground halls of the Tuatha De Danann, where heroes feast eternally after death in battle. These halls contain endless supplies of mead and pork. They contain the company of the divine and the heroic dead. They contain a quality of life that is recognizably similar to the best of earthly warrior existence, but purified of its limitations, made permanent and inexhaustible. The Welsh traditions speak of Anwaon, the otherworld realm, and the halls it contains. The figure of Arawn leads the eternal hunt from these halls, and the dead who dwell there participate in a form of continued existence that mirrors the warrior life they knew on Earth. These Celtic parallels are not coincidences. They are not the result of Norse influence on Celtic cultures or Celtic influence on Norse cultures, though such influences certainly existed. They are, at their deepest level, the separate survivals of a shared inheritance, the residue of beliefs that existed in the common ancestor culture of both the Germanic and Celtic peoples before those peoples separated and went their different ways across the landscape of Europe. But the parallels extend even further into territories that might surprise you. The Zoroastrian religious tradition of ancient Iran, one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions, describes a paradise called the House of Song, the Garo Demana, in the Avestan language. This is the destination of righteous warriors who die fighting against the forces of darkness. The Avestan texts describe it as a great hall where heroes who died in battle continue their struggle in spiritual form, feasting and fighting in service of the divine order against the chaos that threatens to overwhelm it. The Vedic traditions of ancient India describe the Hall of Indra, the warrior god, where those who died in battle join the god's retinue for eternal warfare against demons and dragons. The Sanskrit texts that preserve these descriptions are among the oldest religious literature in the world, and they paint a picture that is recognizably related to what we find in Norse mythology, not because the Norse borrowed from the Indians or the Indians from the Norse, but because both traditions inherited the same ancient template. This pattern, the Hall of the Warrior Dead, the eternal fellowship, the continued combat in service of divine order, appears across an enormous geographic and cultural range. It appears wherever the descendants of the Proto-Indo-European speakers settled, wherever their languages took root and their cultural memories were preserved. The specific details change. The names of the gods change. The specific rituals change. But the core concept, the idea that warriors who die in battle are gathered into a divine hall where they continue their martial existence in service of cosmic order, remains remarkably stable. What does this tell us? It tells us that the belief is old, older than any of the specific cultures that preserved it, old enough that it was already part of the common inheritance of peoples who separated from each other perhaps 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, old enough that it survived the complete transformation of material culture, the transition from a pastoral to an agricultural economy, the development of writing, the rise and fall of empires, the migrations of entire peoples across continents. This is not mythology in the sense of stories someone made up. This is something closer to cultural memory, the preserved echo of a way of understanding the world that was already ancient before history began to record itself. Consider for a moment the Greek tradition of the Elysian Fields, that blessed realm at the edge of the world where heroes who died in battle were said to dwell in a state of perfect, sunlit ease. The Elysian Fields are not a hall in the precise sense that Valhalla is, but the underlying structure is recognizable. The heroes who dwell there are a specific category of the dead. Those who died gloriously, those who died in service of something larger than themselves. They are separated from the ordinary dead who inhabit the grey and cheerless realm of Hades, and placed in a space of exceptional abundance and beauty. The separation of the heroic dead from the ordinary dead, the placement of the heroic dead in a special realm of abundance and continued existence, the idea that how you died determines where you go after death. All of these are elements of the same template we have been following through the Norse and Celtic and Iranian and Indian traditions. Homer's Iliad, which is itself a preservation of oral traditions reaching back to the Bronze Age, is saturated with this understanding. The warriors at Troy fight, knowing that glorious death in battle is the path to immortal fame, to the kind of continued existence in memory and story that the ordinary dead do not achieve. The Greek hero's relationship to death is not simply acceptance. It is something closer to a strategic engagement with death as the mechanism through which the highest form of existence is achieved. This is the same theological logic as Valhalla. The warrior who dies in battle does not lose. The warrior who dies in battle achieves something that the warrior who dies in bed cannot. And what is achieved is not simply fame, not simply memory, but a form of continued existence in a realm where the warrior's qualities find their fullest expression. Let us return now to the archaeological record, because there is more to see there, and it speaks with a directness that language sometimes cannot match. The ship burials of Scandinavia represent one of the most dramatic expressions of beliefs about warrior afterlife that we have from the archaeological record. Ship burial appears first in the Scandinavian Bronze Age, and it continues through the Viking period, spanning more than 2,000 years of consistent practice. The basic idea is simple and profound. The dead warrior is placed in a ship or a boat-shaped grave, along with everything they will need for the journey and the existence that awaits them at the journey's end. The Hjortspring boat from Als in Van, Denmark, dating to approximately 400 to 300 BC, contained weapons and shields arranged as if the vessel carried a full warrior crew into the afterlife. This is not a burial of one person with their personal possessions. This is the staging of a voyage, the preparation of an entire warrior band for a journey to somewhere. The shields are arranged along the sides of the boat, the way they would be arranged on a ship in actual use. The spears are placed as though the warriors who carry them are ready to fight. Someone who arranged this burial understood the journey not as a metaphor, but as a literal event. The warriors were going somewhere. The ship was their transport, and at the end of the voyage, presumably, was a hall. The later ship burials of the Viking Age elaborate this pattern with a sophistication that reflects centuries of accumulated belief and ritual practice. The Oseberg ship burial in Norway, dating to the 9th century AD, is perhaps the most famous of these. The ship itself is a masterpiece of construction, with overlapping planks sealed with resin and a burial chamber built into the vessel's center. This chamber, this hall-like space within the ship, is where the dead held court. It contained not only weapons and jewelry, but also a wooden cart, sleds, beds, kitchen equipment, and textile fragments. The dead were not being sent on a simple journey. They were being relocated. Everything they needed to maintain a complete household, to receive guests, to participate in the social life of a warrior aristocracy was placed with them. The burial chamber in the center of the ship is particularly striking. It is not simply a storage space for grave goods. It is a room built inside a ship, designed to function as a domestic and social space for the dead. The architecture of the burial is the architecture of the hall, miniaturized and placed inside the vessel that would carry it to its destination. This detail has haunted archaeologists since the Oseberg ship was excavated in 1904. The people who built this burial were not thinking about symbolic gestures or poetic metaphors. They were thinking about logistics. Where will the dead need to sit? What will they need to eat? Who will serve them? How will they receive the guests who will come to their hall? These are the questions that the burial answers, with extraordinary practical attention to detail. The Gokstad ship burial, excavated in 1880 from a mound on the western shore of the Oslo Fjord, offers a complementary picture. The warrior buried there, a man of considerable physical stature who showed signs of a life spent in combat, was accompanied by 12 horses, 6 dogs, and 2 peacocks, along with an extraordinary array of weapons, equipment, and provisions. The peacocks are particularly remarkable. Peacocks are not native to Scandinavia. They are birds of the Mediterranean and the Middle East, birds that had travelled an enormous distance to end up buried in a Norwegian mound. Someone had acquired these exotic creatures, perhaps at great expense, and determined that the warrior who was being buried would need them in whatever existence awaited him. The logic of this is the same logic as the Roman glass at Gudme. The most valuable, the most exotic, the most impressive things available were being sent with the dead, because the existence that awaited them was understood to be at least as socially demanding as the existence they had left. The warrior arriving at the divine hall needed to arrive appropriately equipped, appropriately accompanied, appropriately impressive. The burial was not simply an expression of grief. It was a preparation for a social occasion. Now let us look at the weapon deposits, because they tell a different part of the same story, and they tell it with a kind of archaeological eloquence that is genuinely moving when you understand what you're looking at. Across Scandinavia, from the Bronze Age through the Viking period, there are places where enormous quantities of weapons were deliberately deposited in lakes, bogs, and rivers, not lost, not discarded, deliberately placed, often after being ritually destroyed, in bodies of water that served as boundaries between the human world and whatever lay beyond it. The Hjortspring deposit, which we mentioned in connection with the boat burial, actually contained over 150 spears, 20 shields, and multiple swords, all thrown into a bog. Similar deposits have been found at Illerup Adel in Denmark, at Vimose, at Thorsberg, at dozens of other sites across the Scandinavian landscape. The Illerup Adal deposit alone contained thousands of weapons, representing the complete equipment of what appears to have been an entire army. These weapons were not thrown into the bog carelessly. They were processed, ritually destroyed in consistent and deliberate ways, and then deposited in a specific location that had clearly been used for this purpose repeatedly over many years. The scale of these deposits is staggering when you think about what it represents. The weapons at Illerup Adal represent an enormous investment of labour and material. Bronze and iron were not cheap. Weapons were not trivial objects. The decision to destroy and deposit thousands of weapons in a bog represents a commitment of resources that would have been felt throughout the society that made it. This was not a casual offering. This was a major religious act, a transfer of enormous wealth from the human world to whatever powers were understood to inhabit the other side of the water. And what were those powers? What did the people who made these deposits believe was on the other side? The ritual destruction of the weapons before deposition gives us a clue. The swords are bent, the spear points are snapped, the shield bosses are crushed. This deliberate destruction transforms functional weapons into ritual objects. Objects that are no longer useful in the earthly world, but that are, by that very fact, suitable for another kind of use. The weapons have been killed, in a sense, removed from the category of earthly things and transferred to the category of otherworldly things. This parallels, with remarkable precision, the descriptions of Valhalla in the later literary sources, where the Einherjar receive new weapons each day for their eternal battles. The weapons they use are not earthly weapons. They are weapons of a different order, weapons that can be used and then restored, that participate in the logic of the divine world rather than the logic of the human world. The ritually destroyed weapons deposited in the bogs were being transferred to that divine world, being made suitable for use by the divine warriors who inhabited it. The geographic distribution of these deposits is also significant. They tend to follow major river systems and coastlines, the natural boundaries and travel routes of the landscape. They appear at places where land meets water, where the solid and predictable world of the living gives way to the fluid and mysterious world of the depths. These were understood as liminal places, thresholds between one kind of existence and another, and it was at these thresholds that the transfer of weapons to the other world was enacted. Imagine standing at one of these places in the early Iron Age. The bog stretches before you, its surface dark and still, reflecting a sky that is already moving toward evening. You are holding a sword that has been bent deliberately, that has been removed from the category of useful things and placed in the category of sacred things. You're about to throw it into the water, and as you do, you are not simply disposing of a weapon, you are sending it somewhere. You are directing it to a recipient. You are participating in a transaction between your world and another world that you believe is as real as the ground beneath your feet. What did that feel like? What kind of certainty did it require? What kind of relationship with the unseen world did it express? We can't know, not precisely. The people who stood at those bog edges left no written records of their inner experience, but the consistency of their practice across centuries, the enormous investment of resources they were willing to make, the care with which they prepared and processed the weapons before deposition, all of this speaks to a belief system that was not tentative or metaphorical. These people were not performing rituals they half believed in. They were enacting a theology they were certain of, and that theology centered on the idea of warrior dead in a divine hall, receiving weapons from the living world, continuing their martial existence in service of powers that required their strength. Now let us turn to another kind of evidence, one that is perhaps the most direct prefiguration of Valhalla's imagery that the archaeological record provides: hall burning. This is documented in both archaeological and literary sources, and when you understand what it represents, it changes the way you think about the relationship between the living and the dead in early Scandinavian culture. At sites like Ledre in Denmark, excavations have revealed evidence for the deliberate burning of great halls, followed by their reconstruction on the same foundations. This is not accidental fire. The burned layers contain high concentrations of weapons, jewelry, and feasting equipment, placed there before the fire was set. The pattern repeats across multiple building phases, indicating that hall burning and rebuilding formed part of regular ceremonial cycles. Think about what this practice implies. The hall is burned. Everything in it, including valuable objects deliberately deposited there, is consumed by the fire. And then the hall is rebuilt on the same foundations, in the same location, beginning the cycle again. This is not destruction. This is transformation. The hall and everything in it is being transferred from one state to another, from the earthly to the divine, from the visible to the invisible, from the world of the living to the world of the dead. The hall-burning ritual is, in its deepest logic, the same act as the weapon deposit in the bog. It is the transfer of earthly things to other-worldly purposes. But the hall burning is more dramatic, more total, more cosmologically significant, because the hall is not just an object. The hall is the center of the ordered world. Burning the hall is burning the center of the world, and rebuilding it is reconstituting the center of the world, asserting that the ordered cosmos can survive its own destruction and renewal. This is, of course, precisely the logic of Ragnarok and its aftermath in Norse mythology. The world is destroyed, the gods fall, the great hall burns, and then, from the waters, a new world rises. A new hall is built, the cycle begins again. The mythology that describes the end of the world and the beginning of a new one is enacting, on a cosmic scale, the same ritual logic that was enacted in the burning and rebuilding of earthly halls. Valhalla is not just the destination of the warrior dead. It is the hall that must be filled with warriors in preparation for the final battle, the battle in which the cosmic hall itself will burn, and from whose ashes a new world will emerge. The Einherjar are not simply the honored dead. They are the army being assembled for the moment when the hall-burning ritual is enacted on a universal scale. This is the theological architecture that the Bronze Age burial practices, the weapon deposits, the hall rituals were all expressing. This is the belief system that was already ancient when the first Viking Age poet sat down to compose what would become the Poetic Edda. I'm curious whether you've encountered this same pattern somewhere else. This idea of a divine hall or a gathering place for the honoured dead, appearing in traditions the archive hasn't touched on tonight. If something connects for you, leave it below. These threads often lead somewhere unexpected. Let us now enter that literary world, because it is here that the archaeological shadows become literary illumination, and the beliefs we have been tracing through physical evidence finally find their explicit verbal expression. The Poetic Edda is a collection of mythological poetry preserved in a 13th century manuscript known as the Codex Regius. The poems it contains were not composed in the 13th century. They reflect oral traditions that extend back to the early Viking Age, and some of them may preserve material that is considerably older than that. These poems are the primary literary source for Norse mythology as we know it, and they are the first text to describe Valhalla in explicit detail. The poem called Grimnismal, the Sayings of Grimnir, stands as the most comprehensive early source for Valhalla's physical description and organizational structure. The poem presents Odin in disguise, delivering a monologue that systematically describes the geography of the divine realm. And the description of Valhalla that it provides is not vague or impressionistic. It is precise, architectural, and almost logistical in its attention to detail. The most famous passage describes Valhalla's extraordinary dimensions. 500 doors and 40 more, the poem states, and 800 warriors go out through each door when they go to fight the wolf. This mathematical precision creates a hall containing 540 entrances, each accommodating 800 warriors. The total capacity implied is almost incomprehensible by any earthly standard. But the specific numbers are not arbitrary. They carry cosmological significance that a Viking Age audience would have recognized immediately. The number 540 represents the product of 108 multiplied by 5, and 108 is a number that appears throughout Indo-European religious systems with a consistency that is itself remarkable. Hindu tradition recognizes 108 as the number of Upanishads. Buddhist prayer beads contain exactly 108 elements. The number appears in Vedic astronomy in the proportional relationship between the sun, the moon, and the earth. It appears in the architecture of sacred sites across the Indo-European world. This is not coincidence. This is another trace of the shared inheritance we have been following. The number 108 was sacred in the ancestor culture that gave rise to both the Norse and the Indian religious traditions, and it persisted in both traditions across the millennia of their separate development. The 800 warriors emerging from each door connects to an Old Norse word meaning eighth, which appears in contexts describing supernatural multiplication or cosmic abundance. The total capacity of the hall reflects the poem's understanding of Ragnarok as a conflict requiring unprecedented military mobilization. The gods need an army of almost incomprehensible size to face what is coming. Valhalla is the barracks where that army is assembled, maintained, and trained. The mathematical precision of Grimnismal demonstrates something important about the nature of Norse mythological thinking. This is not vague spiritual poetry. This is systematic theology, worked out with careful attention to numbers and proportions and organizational structures. The poet who composed these stanzas was thinking like a military planner, asking practical questions about how a hall of this purpose would actually function, and answering those questions with specific numbers. This reflects the grounded, practical quality of Norse religious thought more generally. The Norse gods are not abstract principles or distant cosmic forces. They are beings with specific characteristics, specific relationships, specific problems to solve. Odin needs an army. He has a specific number of years before Ragnarok arrives. He needs to collect enough warriors to face what is coming. Valhalla is the solution to a practical problem, and Grimnismal describes that solution in practical terms. The poem describes Valhalla's roof as constructed from shields and supported by spear shafts. Spear shafts stand for rafters, the poem states. The hall is roofed with shields. Mail coats lie on the benches. This weaponized architecture transforms the hall itself into an extension of military equipment, blurring the boundaries between shelter and armament. The building is made of weapons. The hall that shelters the warrior dead is itself a weapon. This image reflects actual Viking age practices, where shields were used to create temporary shelters during military campaigns, but it elevates that practical technique to cosmic proportions. The greatest hall in existence is built not from timber and thatch, but from the weapons of the warriors who inhabit it. The hall is the warriors. The warriors are the hall. The boundary between the community and its instruments of defense has dissolved entirely. The description continues with details about Valhalla's guardian animals. A wolf hangs in front of the western door, and an eagle hovers above. These creatures represent Odin's association with the predatory animals that consume battlefield dead. The wolf and the eagle are the scavengers of the battlefield, the creatures that feed on the fallen. In the Norse mythological imagination, these animals are not simply scavengers. They are divine servants, participants in the transformation of the battlefield dead into the warrior dead of Valhalla. The wolf and the eagle consume the fallen body, and what they release is the warrior spirit that Odin's Valkyries gather and carry to the hall. The western door is significant in a way that deserves attention. The west is where the sun dies each day. The western door of Valhalla is the door through which the daily death of light parallels the warrior's transition from earthly life to divine service. The hall exists at the intersection of death and regeneration, at the place where the sun goes when it disappears below the horizon, at the boundary between the visible world and the invisible one. Grimnismal establishes Valhalla's daily routine through a description that captures the fundamental paradox at the heart of the warrior afterlife. The Einherjar, the poem tells us, choose the slain every day and ride out to battle. Then they return and sit in peace together. This is the cycle: combat until death, then resurrection, then feasting, then combat again. The warriors die every day and are reborn every evening. They fight until they are killed, and then they sit down together for the feast, whole and alive, and ready to do it again tomorrow. This cycle resolves, in mythological terms, the central tension of the warrior life. The warrior's purpose is combat, and combat leads to death. But death ends the warrior's existence. How can a warrior fulfill the purpose of being a warrior if fulfilling that purpose destroys the warrior? Valhalla's answer is elegant and complete. In the hall of the warrior dead, the tension is resolved by making death reversible. The warriors can die every day because they come back every evening. They can fulfill their purpose completely, without reservation, without the shadow of permanent loss hanging over every battle, because the permanent loss has already happened. They have already died. Everything that follows is pure warrior existence, uncomplicated by the fear of ending. The feasting that follows the daily battle is described in terms that emphasize supernatural abundance. The cosmic pig Grimnismal is boiled every day and is whole again by evening. The mead flows from the udder of the goat Hydron, who grazes on the leaves of the world tree Yggdrasil. The Valkyries serve the feast. The abundance is inexhaustible because it is not subject to the laws of earthly economics. In the earthly world, a feast requires resources that are finite and that must be replenished. In Valhalla, the resources are infinite because they participate in the logic of the divine world, where the categories of scarcity and exhaustion do not apply. This image of inexhaustible feasting is another echo of the shared Indo-European inheritance we have been tracing. The Celtic otherworld halls offer endless supplies of mead and pork. The Zoroastrian house of song provides eternal nourishment for the righteous dead. The Hall of Indra in Vedic tradition is a place of inexhaustible abundance. The specific details vary, but the underlying concept is consistent. The Otherworld Hall is a place where the fundamental anxieties of earthly existence, scarcity, mortality, the limits of what the body can endure, have been resolved. The hall offers what the earthly world cannot. And yet the hall is not a place of passive enjoyment. This is perhaps the most distinctive characteristic of Valhalla compared to other conceptions of paradise. The Einherjar do not rest. They do not contemplate. They do not simply enjoy their reward for having lived well. They train. They fight. They prepare. They are, in a very real sense, still at work. The afterlife in Valhalla is not a vacation from the warrior life. It is the warrior life perfected, the warrior life freed from its earthly limitations, the warrior life made eternal and inexhaustible. This reflects something important about the values of the culture that produced this mythology. The Norse warrior ideal was not about enjoying the fruits of victory. It was about the quality of the fighting itself, about courage and skill, and the willingness to face death without flinching. A paradise of passive enjoyment would have been, in this cultural framework, almost an insult. The greatest gift the gods could offer a warrior was not rest, but the opportunity to keep doing what warriors do forever, without the constraints that earthly existence imposed. The Valkyries who serve in Valhalla and who gather the warrior dead from the battlefield are among the most complex figures in Norse mythology, and their complexity reflects the theological sophistication of the belief system they inhabit. The word Valkyrie derives from the same Proto-Germanic root as the first element of Valhalla. They are the choosers of the slain, the divine agents who select which warriors will die in battle and be carried to Odin's hall. This selection function is theologically significant. Not every warrior who dies in battle goes to Valhalla. The Valkyries choose. This means that the warrior dead of Valhalla are not simply the casualties of war. They are the chosen, the selected, the warriors who have demonstrated the qualities that make them useful for Odin's purpose. The battlefield is not just a place of death. It is a testing ground, a selection process, a means by which the divine army is assembled from the best of the human warriors. The Valkyries themselves are figures of extraordinary power and ambiguity. They are divine, associated with Odin and his purposes. But they also appear in the mythology as figures who can form attachments to individual warriors, who can protect their favorites in battle, who can be moved by something that looks very much like love, or loyalty, or personal preference. They are not simply mechanical agents of divine selection. They are beings with their own perspectives, their own relationships, their own complicated positions between the divine world and the human one. This complexity is not an accident of mythological inconsistency. It reflects the actual theological function of the Valkyrie in the belief system. They are the bridge between the human world and the divine world, the agents through whom the divine army is assembled from human material. Their ambiguity, their capacity for both divine purpose and personal attachment reflects the ambiguity of their position at the boundary between two kinds of existence. The Valkyrie's role in gathering the warrior dead connects them in ways that scholars have long recognized to older figures in the pre-literary Scandinavian belief system. The women who appear in early Scandinavian burial contexts, the figures associated with the graves of warrior elites, may reflect a pre-literary understanding of the divine feminine as the agent of transition between life and death. The archaeological record preserves traces of beliefs about women as mediators between the living and the dead that predate the literary mythology by centuries. The Oseberg ship burial, which we discussed earlier, contained the remains of two women. One of them appears to have been of very high status, buried with extraordinary wealth and care. The other may have been sacrificed to accompany the first. The identity of the high-status woman has been debated extensively, but one compelling interpretation is that she was a religious specialist, a woman whose role in the living community was to mediate between the human world and the divine one. If this interpretation is correct, then the Valkyries of the literary mythology may preserve the memory of actual women who performed this mediating function in the pre-literary religious practice. The connection is speculative, as all connections between archaeological evidence and literary mythology must be. But it is the kind of speculation that the evidence supports, the kind of interpretive possibility that emerges naturally from careful attention to both the physical record and the textual one. Now let us consider the figure of Odin himself, because Valhalla cannot be understood without understanding the god who rules it and the purpose for which he assembled his army of the dead. Odin is the most complex figure in the Norse pantheon, and his complexity reflects the complexity of the theological system he inhabits. He is the All-Father, the ruler of the gods, the master of wisdom and poetry and war and death. But he is also a figure of profound ambiguity, a god who practices deception, who sacrifices himself to himself in order to gain knowledge, who hangs on the world tree for 9 days and nights to learn the secrets of the runes, who gives one of his eyes to drink from the well of wisdom. Odin's obsession with gathering warriors in Valhalla is not simply a matter of divine vanity or a desire for an impressive court. It is driven by knowledge. Odin knows that Ragnarok is coming. He knows that the great wolf Fenrir will break his chains, that the Midgard serpent will rise from the ocean, that the fire giant Surt will come from the south with a sword that burns brighter than the sun. He knows that the gods will fall. He knows that he himself will be swallowed by Fenrir. And he knows that the only hope, the only possibility of any kind of survival or continuation lies in the army he has been assembling in Valhalla across the entire span of human history. This is why Odin values the warrior dead above all other categories of the dead. This is why the Valkyries choose the bravest and most skilled warriors from every battlefield. This is why the Einherjar train every day in Valhalla, fighting and dying and being reborn, honing their skills for a battle that will be the last battle, the battle that determines the fate of the cosmos. The theological logic here is remarkable in its coherence. Valhalla is not a reward for warriors who have lived well. It is a strategic necessity for a god who knows what is coming and is trying to prepare for it. The warrior dead are not simply honoured guests in Odin's hall. They are recruits in the divine army, soldiers who have been selected and are being trained for the most important battle in the history of the universe. This gives the Norse mythology a quality that is quite different from most other religious traditions. Most conceptions of the afterlife are oriented toward the past, toward reward or punishment for what was done in life. Valhalla is oriented toward the future. The Einherjar are not there because of what they did. They are there because of what they will do. They are there because Odin needs them. And this orientation toward the future, toward the coming catastrophe and the possibility of survival beyond it, gives the Norse mythological system its distinctive quality of tragic grandeur. The gods know they will lose. Odin knows he will die. The Einherjar know that even their extraordinary skills and numbers may not be enough to turn the tide of Ragnarok. And yet they prepare, and yet they train, and yet the feasting continues every evening, and the battles resume every morning, and the Valkyries continue to gather the warrior dead from every battlefield across the human world. There is something in this that resonates beyond its specific mythological context. The image of beings who know they face inevitable defeat and yet continue to prepare, continue to fight, continue to maintain the rituals of fellowship and combat, speaks to something deep in the human experience of mortality and purpose. We all know at some level that we are preparing for a battle we cannot ultimately win. We all know that time will take everything, and yet we continue. We maintain our halls. We feast with our companions. We train for battles that may not come, or that may come in forms we cannot anticipate. The Norse mythological system, with Valhalla at its centre, is one of the most honest accounts of this condition that any religious tradition has ever produced. It does not promise ultimate victory. It does not promise that goodness will be rewarded with safety. It promises only that the struggle is worth undertaking, that the fellowship of the hall is worth maintaining, that the warrior who fights well and dies well has earned a place in the company of those who fought and died before them. This is the truth that the Kivik grave was expressing in its carved stone panels more than 3,000 years ago. This is the truth that the weapon deposits in the bogs were enacting across centuries of accumulated ritual practice. This is the truth that the hall burnings and rebuildings were performing in their cycles of destruction and reconstitution. The hall endures, the fellowship endures, the struggle endures, and those who gave themselves to the struggle are gathered at last into the company of all who gave themselves before. The later reception of Valhalla in the medieval period and beyond is a story of transformation and, in some ways, of diminishment. As Scandinavia converted to Christianity in the 10th and 11th centuries, the mythological system that had sustained these beliefs was gradually suppressed, replaced, or absorbed into the new religious framework. The great halls where the old rituals had been performed were repurposed or abandoned. The weapon deposits in the bogs ceased. The ship burials gave way to Christian burial practices. But the mythology survived. It survived in the memories of poets and storytellers, in the oral traditions that continued to circulate even as the official religion changed, in the manuscripts that 13th century Icelandic scholars compiled with a combination of antiquarian interest and genuine reverence for the old material. The Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda of Snorri Sturluson, compiled in the 13th century, preserved the mythology of Valhalla in forms that have allowed it to reach us across 8 centuries of subsequent history. Snorri Sturluson is a particularly fascinating figure in this transmission. A 13th century Icelandic chieftain and scholar, he compiled the Prose Edda partly as a handbook for poets who wanted to use the old mythological imagery in their work, and partly, it seems, out of genuine fascination with the material he was recording. He was a Christian writing about a pre-Christian mythology, and the tension between his religious commitments and his evident admiration for the old material runs through his work in complex and interesting ways. Snorri's account of Valhalla draws on the same sources that the Poetic Edda preserves, but he elaborates and systematizes them in ways that reflect his own scholarly sensibility. His description of the hall, its dimensions, its daily routines, its supernatural provisions, is more comprehensive and more organized than anything in the older poetry. He is, in a sense, doing what archaeologists do, assembling the fragments of a lost world into a coherent picture, using the evidence available to him to reconstruct something that was already becoming obscure in his own time. The irony is that Snorri's systematization, while it made the mythology more accessible and more comprehensible to later readers, also froze it in a particular form that may not reflect the full complexity of the living tradition. The mythology as Snorri presents it is tidier, more organized, more logically consistent than the older poetry suggests it actually was. The living tradition was probably more varied, more regionally diverse, more internally contradictory than the 13th century synthesis implies. But even in its synthesized form, the mythology preserves the essential structure of the beliefs we have been tracing through the archaeological record. The hall, the warrior dead, the daily combat and the nightly feast, the preparation for the final battle, the Valkyries who gather the chosen from the world of the living. These elements are as present in Snorri's 13th century account as they are in the Bronze Age burial practices of the Kivik grave. The continuity is remarkable. 3,000 years of continuous cultural transmission across enormous changes in material culture, social organization, religious practice, and political structure, and the core idea persists. The warrior dead are gathered in a great hall. They continue their martial existence in service of a divine purpose. They feast together in the evenings. They are preparing for something that has not yet come. What does it mean for an idea to survive that long? What does it mean for a belief to persist across the kind of historical distance that separates the Bronze Age from the Viking Age? It means, at minimum, that the belief was answering a question that people kept asking. It means that the question it answered was not a trivial one, not a question that could be set aside or resolved by other means. It means that the belief was doing real work in the cultures that preserved it, that it was providing something that people needed and could not get elsewhere. What was that something? What need did the belief in Valhalla answer? Perhaps the most honest answer is that it answered the need to make sense of the warrior's death. In societies organized around martial values, where the highest expression of masculine virtue was the willingness to fight and die in battle, the death of warriors in combat was not simply a loss. It was the fulfillment of the warrior's purpose. But if death is simply ending, then the fulfillment of the warrior's purpose is also the end of the warrior. The most complete expression of what the warrior is destroys the warrior. This is a profound tension, and it requires a profound resolution. Valhalla provides that resolution. The warrior who dies in battle does not end. The warrior who dies in battle is selected, gathered, carried to the hall of the divine warrior lord, where the warrior's existence continues in its most perfect form, freed from the limitations that earthly life imposed. The death that fulfilled the warrior's purpose is also the beginning of the warrior's truest existence. This is not a comforting lie told to make death easier to face. This is a serious theological proposition about the nature of the warrior's relationship to death, about what it means for a being whose purpose is combat to encounter the death that combat brings. And it is a proposition that, as we have seen, was worked out over thousands of years of accumulated religious practice in the burial chambers and the bog deposits and the burning halls of pre-Christian Scandinavia. The people who developed this belief were not naive. They were not deceiving themselves about the reality of death. They buried their dead with extraordinary care and attention, which suggests that they took the reality of loss seriously. They deposited weapons in bogs with enormous investment of resources, which suggests that they felt the weight of what they were doing. They burned their halls and rebuilt them, which suggests that they understood the cycle of destruction and renewal as something that required real engagement, real sacrifice, real commitment. These were not people who believed in Valhalla because it was easy to believe. They believed in it because it was the most coherent account they could construct of what the warrior's death meant, and they were willing to invest enormous resources in enacting and maintaining that belief. And perhaps that is the most remarkable thing about the truth we have been uncovering tonight. The belief in Valhalla was not a fantasy. It was a serious attempt to understand the relationship between the warrior's life, the warrior's death, and the cosmic order that both served. It was an attempt that was worked out over 3,000 years of accumulated practice and reflection that drew on the shared inheritance of an entire family of cultures, that was expressed in the physical record of burial practices and weapon deposits and hall rituals before it was ever expressed in words. The words came last, the mythology we know, the poetry of the Eddas, the prose of Snorri. These are the final crystallization of something that had been forming for millennia before anyone thought to write it down. The carved stone panels of the Kivik grave, the bent swords at the bottom of the Illerup Adel bog, the burned layers of the Lejdra halls, the burial chamber in the centre of the Oseberg ship. All of these are Valhalla. All of these are the belief made physical, made material, made permanent in ways that outlasted the cultures that created them. The truth about Valhalla's ancient origins is this: it was not invented. It was assembled slowly and carefully from the oldest available materials in the human understanding of death and meaning, and the persistence of the warrior spirit beyond the moment of its earthly ending. It was assembled by people who had no way of knowing that their work would survive them by 3,000 years, who had no way of knowing that someone would one day piece together the evidence they left behind and recognize in it the same belief that the poets of the Viking age would eventually put into words. They were not the beginning. They were inheritors of something older still, something that came to them from the common ancestor culture of the Indo-European world, from the people who first looked at the death of a warrior and asked what it meant, and found in the image of the great hall, warm and lit, and filled with the sound of feasting, the most honest answer they could give. And that answer has been echoing ever since. Through the Bronze Age burial chambers, through the Iron Age bog deposits, through the Viking Age ship burials, through the medieval manuscripts that preserved the poetry of the Eddas through all the centuries of subsequent history, in which the image of Valhalla has continued to appear, continued to resonate, continued to answer questions that people keep asking. The hall endures. The warrior dead are gathered. The feast continues. And somewhere beneath the accumulated weight of 3,000 years of history, the carved stone panels of the Kivik grave still show the procession moving toward the great building at the end of the path, the hall that was already ancient when the carving was made, the hall that will still be recognizable long after everything we have built has returned to dust. Perhaps that is what they were trying to tell us. Not that death is not real, not that loss is not loss, but that the hall persists, that the fellowship persists, that the things worth fighting for are worth fighting for precisely because they are larger than any individual life, because they existed before us and will continue after us, because we are participants in something that was already old when we arrived and will still be unfolding when we are gone. Perhaps that is the deepest comfort that the archive offers tonight. Not certainty, not the reassurance that everything will be fine, but the quieter, more durable comfort of continuity. The knowledge that the questions you carry have been carried before. The knowledge that the darkness you sit in tonight is a darkness that has always been full of people asking the same things, turning the same evidence over in their hands, looking at the same carved stone panels and the same bent swords and the same burned foundations, and wondering what it all means. They wondered, and they kept building. They burned the hall, and they raised it again on the same foundations. They bent the sword, and they sent it to the water's edge. They carved the procession into stone so that someone, somewhere, in some future they could not imagine, might look at it and understand. Not the specific words of their belief, not the names they used for their gods or their dead, but the shape of the belief itself. The procession moving toward the hall at the end of the path, the gathering of those who gave themselves to the struggle. That shape is what has survived. That shape is what the archive has been holding for us in the soil of Kivik and the depths of Adal and the burned layers of Ledra, waiting for someone patient enough to look carefully and see what was always there. If this is the kind of night where sleep has found other things to do, let this one play again from the beginning. The layers reveal themselves differently with each listen, and there is always something the archive saved for a second visit. And if someone in your life carries questions like these, the ones that surface in the quiet hours, send this to them. Hidden histories deserve more than one pair of ears. Every time someone shares what the archive has found, a thread of curiosity stretches across the distance between two people who might never have known they were asking the same questions in the dark. Let that thought settle around you now, like dust in a quiet room, like the silence after the last word of an old story has been spoken. You have been listening in the dark, in whatever corner of the world you inhabit tonight, drawn to the same ancient questions that have drawn people to the edges of bogs and the interiors of burial chambers, and the great halls of warrior kings for 3,000 years. The archive is always open, the files are always waiting, and the truth, when you find it, does not disturb. It settles, it grounds. It reminds you that you are part of something much older and much larger than the brief span of your individual days. That the questions you carry are questions that have been carried before. That the darkness you sit in tonight is the same darkness that has always been full of people asking what it means, and finding in the asking something that feels very much like rest. The clay remembers what we have forgotten. The stone preserves what the words have lost. And somewhere in the long silence between the Bronze Age and tonight, the hall is still burning and being rebuilt. The weapons are still being carried to the water's edge. The Valkyries are still moving across the fields of the fallen, choosing, gathering, carrying the chosen home. Sleep well. The archive will be here when you return.